In this video, we like to explain a few things about proper aerotowing, how to fly it, and what to keep in mind. What do we need? An aircraft equipped for aerotowing, along with a pilot trained and certified in towing operations. Of course, a suitable tow rope, a glider with a pilot trained in Aerotow launches, and finally, a wingman. However, life is usually not that simple. We have to pay attention to things like the tow rope, the correct weak links, the procedures during takeoff, and most critical, proper in-flight behavior to maintain a good position behind the tow plane. In the following chapters, we will explain all this in much more detail. Surprisingly, the tow rope has two ends. It's about 50 meters long and must have a weak link on the glider side. In dangerous situations, this link will break if an unusual amount of force is applied in the towing direction. The amount of force at which it breaks can be adjusted by using the correct weak links. They range from 300 to 1000 decanewton. The braking load is specified in the flight manual for the particular aircraft type. This must not exceed the towing load approved for the tow aircraft. The braking load given in the manual is the maximum strength tolerated by the aircraft's design. The lowest allowable value determines the maximum permissible braking load for this configuration. There is a recommendation developed with the manufacturers and the LBA based on tow testing for motor gliders. This recommendation suggests that 300 decanewton weak links should be used as a standard in long-haul configuration. What does this mean? Before braking, a weak link is permanently deformed. That is, it stretches, becoming longer and thinner until it finally breaks. Now, if a second weak link of equal strength is connected in parallel with a long hole, it's possible that a sudden jerk could break the first weak link, but the force would be dampened so that the second parallel weak link would take effect, allowing for a delayed overload detection after the tow. Similar to electrical slow blow and fast-acting fuses, it naturally requires that protective covers are well maintained and open on the sides so that broken pieces are immediately visible. The configuration shown here even has an additional weak link on the tow plane, which is stronger than the glider's release mechanism. Why? Well, not all tow planes have a rope retraction reel and have to land with the tow rope trailing behind. If the rope gets caught on a fence or elsewhere, it can lead to serious accidents. In our case here, the second safety link would break. One more thing. Welded rings pairs are strictly prohibited when using tossed couplings, as they can cause damage to the coupling. A wing runner or wingman is an essential help. He picks up the tow rope and brings it to the glider while the crew is making their pre-flight preparations. Avoid to move in front of the towing machine. To handle the rope, there are some methods that you don't burn yourself on the rope. Ideal would be a simple hook or carabiner, but don't forget to remove it. At the plane, the wing runner waits until the crew is ready to attach the rope. It is good practice to show the weak link to the pilot if everything is okay. When the wing runner says, "out," it signals the crew to release the hook and answers with "out." Now the ring pair of the towing rope can be attached. The wing runner says "in," signaling that the ring is in the coupling, which is the signal for the crew to close the coupling, and responds with "in." Now a connection is established. A quick proof should follow.
Jo. Aus, ein. Ja, das Zielbild.
If the crew is ready, the pilot in command gives a thumbs-up signal. indicating that the wing runner can lift the wing. The wing should only be lifted once the pilot has explicitly given this signal. Now, the wing runner raises their hand to signal to the towplane pilot that everything is set up, and the towplane begins to tighten the rope. A good habit is to place the rope slightly to the side so you can clearly see it tighten. The wing runner indicates a tightened rope by lowering their hand, and additionally, the pilot radios "rope tight."
Sei straff.
Flugzeug startet jetzt.
Some gliders have a nose hook and a winch launch hook. For Aerotow, the nose hook should be used as it provides better stability, since the towplane pulls the glider into a following position. Observe these two animations. In the lower video, the more stable nose hook is used. However, good position control is necessary in both cases. Additionally, here are two more tips. Remember the identification of the towplane and tune to the correct radio frequency before entering the start grid to establish good communication. As you can imagine, not every airplane is suitable for towing. Watch the video comparing different towing loads. On one hand, the takeoff distance of the towplane varies depending on air pressure, temperature, wind, runway conditions. Compare tall, wet grass to concrete, and more. On the other hand, the towing load differs. A two-seater with two heavy people, a fueled auxiliary engine, and water ballast has no chance of being lifted into the air by a motor glider on wet grass. A motor glider and a single-seater certainly have a more harmonious relationship. And if you have a really capable towing plane and skilled pilots, this is also possible. But don't try it without specialized training.
Seilstraff.
The start is a critical phase. At the very beginning, the airflow over the control surfaces is still weak, so your control inputs need to be very large. The wing runner has an important job in the first few seconds. As speed increases, it becomes easier to maintain the balance of the wings. During the first few meters, keep the elevator neutral and focus on maintaining the wings level. As you roll forward with only minimal control effectiveness, the tail wheel helps you hold direction. Try to roll on the main wheel as early as possible. This allows you to best control your position behind the tow plane. Lateral direction is controlled with the rudder. At sufficient speed, the glider will lift off on its own, but it will take off quite a bit earlier than the tow plane. It cannot be stressed enough to avoid climbing above the tow plane at this stage. Pulling on the tow line would lift the tow plane's tail, pushing its nose downward. A highly dangerous situation to be avoided at all costs. For a good understanding, watch the full launch sequence here from tow plane and glider's view. The wing runner lifts the wing, and the tow plane positions itself in the takeoff direction, slowly taking up the slack in the tow rope. When the signal is given, the tow pilot informs the tower, tow plane starting, and powers up the engine.
Seilstraff.
Flugzeug startet.
The glider pilot maintains wing level, rolls onto the main wheel as soon as possible, and lifts off earlier than the tow plane. The glider stays very low above the ground, about 1 meter, to avoid pulling the tail of the tow plane upward which would cause instability and potentially lead to an accident. It is important to mention that the tow pilot's rearward visibility through the rearview mirror is quite limited. If we don't follow precisely, our glider can quickly disappear from view, which understandably might make the tow pilot nervous. Here are some tips. Set the trim slightly nose down. This helps to avoid climbing above the tow plane. Be prepared for crosswinds. While rolling on the main wheel, the wind will force on the rudder, the largest surface area, and will cause your aircraft to turn its nose into the wind around the main wheel. Bring your plane back to the center position behind the towing machine, and keep the nose slightly into the wind. Once you are airborne, the wind will drift you in its direction, so maintain a windward angle. When both planes are airborne, the crosswind hits both planes with the same force. If a wing touches the ground or your aircraft veers off course, release immediately. In straight flight, we follow the tow plane in a straight line as well, roughly positioning it on the horizon. As you can see in the video, it's interesting to note that even a slight deviation in altitude can cause the tow plane pilot to lose sight of the glider. In such a case, they will likely ask you to correct your position. If we're too low, we enter the propeller wash, which can be felt as a vibration. However, we must strictly avoid getting too high, as there's a risk of lifting the tail of the tow plane, which cannot be corrected. This is especially dangerous after takeoff and when close to the ground. Our tow plane sometimes changes direction. We want to follow. With a slight delay, we adopt the same bank angle. If we wait too long, we'll drift too far out of the curve. If we're too fast, we'd overtake the towing machine on the inside. Neither is good. We have to fly the same turn radius as the tow plane. As the bank angle increases, our nose needs to point more and more towards the outer wingtip of the tow plane. This is achieved with the rudder. We use the aileron to keep the same bank angle and to avoid falling into the circle, as the tow plane is pulling us into the turn. Take your time to watch the following real flight example. Observe the relative position of the two planes as the towing aircraft enters a left turn. Notice how our aiming point shifts to the right. With practice, you too will be able to control the plane smoothly. In my early days, I needed over 20 lessons with my instructor to master this technique. My key takeaway was that the rudder controls direction, while the aileron is used only to maintain the same and consistent bank angle. When the turn ends, we return to our original direction and aim directly at the towing aircraft again. Alright, let's assume we initiated the bank angle too late. What will happen? Well, now we are positioned further outside in the turn and have to cover a greater distance. This requires more speed, which generates more lift. The glider's increased drag then pulls the tow plane even further into the turn. If we oversteer, we take a tighter turn. We need less speed. This reduces lift and causes the tow line to slacken. As a result, we sink into the turn. When the tow line tightens again, it creates a jolt for both pilots. If the slack becomes too great, we must release. Deviations can be corrected by slipping in the direction that needs adjustment. Sometimes the slack can be corrected using the air brakes. Your instructor will happily help you if you have questions. Again, I needed a lot of training lessons to understand the Aerotow dynamics. As mentioned, good coordination with the tow pilot is important. Towing pilots are friendly people, and we should be too. When we set up our radio, the tow pilot often asks, "Where to?" And we answer, "Into the next thermal," although that's usually obvious. At some airports, there are standard routes to choose from depending on the weather and wind. It's also worth noting that at some airports, you pay based on towing time, while at others, you pay according to altitude gained. During aerotowing, concentrate on the towing machine and avoid closing windows, chasing flies in the cockpit, or playing with the navigation system. It's better to watch out for a good landing field for a plan B if something goes wrong. By the way, the towing machine also has a release mechanism. If you are doing trouble behind the tow plane, the pilot will not hesitate to release you. In this case, you also have to release as the rope is still attached to our plane. If the tow plane rocks its wings, that's the usual signal to release. But be quick. The tow plane will immediately begin to descend. Time is money. If you're the one initiating the release, maintain control a few meters above the normal towing altitude, release, and immediately turn right to avoid contact with the tow rope. It's customary to simply say, "Thanks," but a more coordinated call is recommended, such as Hotel Alpha, Oscar Echo 5599 has released. This is especially important when multiple tows are happening simultaneously. We don't want to end up being towed home in a steep turn due to a mix-up. With a bit more practice, you can fly a so-called box with your flight instructor. This allows you to apply everything you've learned, build confidence, and it's also an excellent exercise. This can be done in straight flight or also in turns. The order of aiming points is not important, but you should stay within the box, which are the limits. Watch this 2-minute video snippet for an example. This video is playing at 1.5 times the normal speed. During training, take your time to move from one corner to the other. You will get a feeling when oversteering. video, of course, presents idealized conditions, and the simulations are kept simple. In the real world, everything is a bit different. The video is meant as a learning aid and in no way replaces an instructor. Please read the disclaimer in the video description. The content presented in these YouTube videos is intended solely for informational purposes, guidance, and providing examples for pilots. It does not absolve the viewer from the responsibility of thoroughly informing themselves of actual flight rules, regulations, and safety protocols.